It was late autumn when Sarah first noticed something strange happening in her small town. The crisp air carried with it a quiet, unsettling stillness that wasn't normal for this time of year. She had lived in Ashwood her whole life, and while it had always been quiet, something felt different now. The townsfolk seemed to be keeping more to themselves. Conversations were whispered, and there were fewer people on the streets even during the busiest times of the day. Sarah worked at the local library, and over the past few weeks, she had noticed a significant decline in visitors. Normally, the library was a lively place where children came after school, and the elderly spent their afternoons reading, but now it was nearly empty. Even Mrs. Jenkins, the town's most avid reader, hadn't been in for her usual Thursday visit. Something was amiss, but Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. At first, Sarah thought she was just imagining things. After all, it wasn't uncommon for small towns like Ashwood to go through quiet spells. But then she started hearing the rumors. Whispers in the grocery store, hurried conversations outside the post office about people disappearing. They weren't just moving away or leaving town quietly. They were vanishing without a trace, and the police had no explanation. It started with Mr. Thompson, the friendly butcher, who failed to open his shop one morning. His wife found the door unlocked, the lights still on, and his car parked outside. But he was gone. Then it was the school janitor, Miss Amy, who didn't show up for work one day and was never heard from again. Sarah's curiosity turned to worry, but she still didn't let it get to her. Maybe they were just isolated incidents, she thought, trying to convince herself. However, Sarah couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something much darker was happening in Ashwood. One night, while she was locking up the library, she heard footsteps behind her. They were slow, deliberate, and far too close for comfort. She whipped around, but no one was there. Just the empty street and the faint glow of the streetlights. Her heart raced as she hurried to her car, fumbling with her keys. The footsteps continued, quickening to match her pace, but when she finally managed to get inside her car and slam the door shut, the sound stopped. Sarah sat there for a few moments, gripping the steering wheel and staring out into the dark street, her breathing shallow. Was someone following her? Or had her imagination finally gotten the better of her? The drive home that night felt longer than usual, and when she got inside, she made sure to lock every door and window. Over the next few days, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the footsteps. She told herself that it was probably nothing, just her nerves getting to her because of the strange events around town. But the more she tried to push it out of her mind, the more unsettled she became. Something wasn't right. On a particularly cold Friday evening, Sarah decided to visit her friend Emily. Emily had always been the practical one, the type of person who could dismiss any irrational fear with a logical explanation. "You're letting the rumors get to you," Emily said after Sarah confided in her about the disappearances and the footsteps. "There's probably a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this. People leave towns all the time. And as for the footsteps, maybe it was just an echo, or someone walking their dog." Sarah nodded, but deep down, she wasn't convinced. Emily's words, though meant to be reassuring, did little to calm her growing unease. That night, after returning from Emily's house, Sarah couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with thoughts of what could be happening in Ashwood. She decided to get up and make herself a cup of tea, hoping it would help her relax. As she stood in the kitchen, waiting for the water to boil, she glanced out the window and froze. Across the street, under the dim streetlight, was a figure standing completely still. It was too dark to make out any features, but whoever it was seemed to be staring directly at her house. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she slowly backed away from the window. Was it the same person who had been following her that night outside the library? She debated calling the police, but hesitated. What would she say? That someone was standing outside? They would probably think she was overreacting. Instead, she hurried upstairs and locked herself in her bedroom, praying that the figure would be gone by morning. The next morning, Sarah cautiously peeked out of her window, relieved to see that the figure was gone. She convinced herself that it had been a trick of the light, or maybe just someone passing by late at night. But the relief didn't last long. That afternoon, as Sarah walked to the grocery store, she felt that same unsettling sensation, the feeling of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder multiple times. "I'm Zrania," but saw no one. When she reached the store, she noticed that the shelves were unusually empty, as though people had been stockpiling supplies. The atmosphere in the town had shifted from quiet to tense, and Sarah could see it in the faces of the few people who were out and about. Fear was spreading, and no one seemed to know what to do. Things took a turn for the worse when Emily went missing. Sarah had called her that evening to check in, but there was no answer. At first, she thought nothing of it. Emily was probably busy. But after 2 days of radio silence, Sarah began to panic. She went to Emily's house, knocked on the door, and even called her name, but there was no response. The door was locked, the curtains drawn, and Emily's car was still parked in the driveway. Sarah called the police, but when they arrived, they didn't seem overly concerned. They took down a report and assured Sarah they would look into it, but she could tell by their dismissive tone that they didn't think much of it. "People leave town," one of the officers had said. But Sarah knew Emily. She wouldn't just leave without telling anyone. Desperation set in. Sarah spent the next few days searching for any sign of Emily, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. She asked around town, but no one had seen her. It was as if Emily had never existed. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Had Emily been taken like the others? Was there something sinister lurking in Ashwood, something that the police were refusing to acknowledge? Her nights were sleepless, plagued by nightmares and the constant fear that she was next. The figure outside her house, the footsteps, Emily's disappearance, it was all connected. Sarah was sure of it. She began keeping her phone by her side at all times, constantly checking it for messages or missed calls, hoping that Emily would somehow get in touch. One evening, as Sarah was sitting on her couch, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. The text read, "I know what's happening in Ashwood. Meet me at the old train station tonight at midnight." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Who could this be? Was it a trap, or could this person really know something about the disappearances? She hesitated, debating whether or not to go. But her curiosity got the better of her. She needed answers, and this might be her only chance to find out what was going on. She grabbed her coat and flashlight, trying to steady her nerves as she made her way to the train station. The streets were eerily empty, and the silence only heightened her fear. When Sarah arrived at the old train station, it was just as she remembered, abandoned, overgrown with weeds, and completely deserted. The wind howled through the broken windows, sending shivers down her spine. She glanced around, but there was no one in sight. Had the message been a cruel joke? She was about to turn back when she heard a faint noise from inside the station. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped through the broken door, her flashlight illuminating the decaying interior. The air was thick with dust, and every sound echoed in the empty space. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. "You came," the voice said. It was a man, his face hidden in the darkness. Sarah's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man stepped forward, his face now visible in the dim light. "I've been watching the town," he said quietly. "I've seen what's been happening, and I know why people are disappearing." Sarah's heart raced. "Why?" she demanded, desperate for answers. The man hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if someone might be listening. "There's something in the woods, something ancient, something that's been here long before this town was built. It's waking up, and it's hungry." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted to dismiss his words as the ravings of a madman, but deep down she knew he was telling the truth. The strange occurrences, the disappearances, it all made sense now. Sarah took a step back, her mind racing. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man shook his head. "I don't know if there's anything we can do," he admitted, "but you need to leave, now. Get out of Ashwood before it's too late." Sarah's mind whirled with fear and confusion. Could she really leave everything behind? What about Emily? But the urgency in the man's voice told her that staying wasn't an option. As she turned to leave, the man grabbed her arm. "One more thing," he said, his voice low and serious. "Whatever you do, don't go into the woods." Sarah nodded. her heart pounding as she ran back to her car. The weight of his warning lingered in her mind as she sped down the empty streets, knowing that she would never look at Ash